All aboard and welcome to our recreated 1960s transcontinental train trip featuring this train, Northern Pacific Railway's Vistadome North Coast Limited. We actually start in New York on New York Central's 20th Century Limited. It leaves at 5 in the afternoon and is an overnight trip in Chicago, where we arrive the next morning at Chicago Union Station. We just have an hour or two to get over to LaSalle Station and catch the North Coast Limited for the remainder of the trip west. We board the North Coast Limited late morning in Chicago for our two-night trip, 2,300 miles westward, all the way to Seattle, Washington. Earlier in episodes 2 and 3, we traveled from Chicago all the way out to Bozeman, Montana. And today we start in Bozeman and we'll make our way to the Montana-Idaho border. Here we're seen just leaving Bozeman, heading west across the Gallatin Valley. The Northern Pacific ran the North Coast Limited from 1900 up until 1970, when it merged with a few other railroads to form the Burlington Northern. The Burlington Northern ran the North Coast Limited for about a year, at which point Amtrak took over the North Coast Limited in 1971, calling it the North Coast Hiawatha. Amtrak discontinued passenger service along this line in 1979, so this line has been vacated for over 40 years, at least as far as passenger service goes. The footage you see here was actually taken from a fan train organized by the Northern Pacific Railway Historical Association in 1998. So this footage is over 20 years old. Very rare footage, as there may not have been another passenger train on this route in all of the time, all that time up from 1979 until now. We're in the Three Forks, Montana area, which is where the Madison, Gallatin, and Jefferson rivers all come together to form the Missouri River. Jefferson Canyon now, running along the Jefferson River. I spend most of this trip in the vestibule between cars, hanging my camera out the side of the train with the vestibule door window down. I changed sides depending on which was the most interesting, going from left to right. Check out this big monster water tower coming up, Railroad Water Tower. You don't realize how big it is until we get just about even with it and I pan back to show the house that's behind it. train ride we've been on, which started in Billings, Montana, about 200 miles back to the east of us, ends here in Whitehall, Montana, and we go to footage that I shot in the year 2017. The tracks have been fairly level for the past 60 or 70 miles ever since we got over the Bozeman Pass, but now we come to the most difficult part of the Rocky Mountains to cross. Now this is where the Continental Divide goes through. The Northern Pacific made two main lines over the Rockies. We have the Mullen Pass to the north for freight trains and the Homestake Pass for the North Coast Limited. We're going to take a look at Mullen Pass first. At the top of Mullen Pass is the Mullen Tunnel, which has long been problematic ever since it was built in 1883. It had many floods and cave-ins. In 2009, the Burlington Northern daylighted a good part of this tunnel, and I'll show you the tunnel as it was back in the days of the North Coast Limited. This footage I shot probably around 1995. Here we're looking to the west toward Missoula from above the tunnel, and you can see some of the rock that was taken out of here. The North Coast Limited actually took this pass, which is the Homestake Pass route. This route has not been active since 1983, although it hasn't been officially abandoned, and I understand that the reason it hasn't been officially abandoned and is kept up to somewhat minimal standards is that Burlington Northern Santa Fe would have to restore this area to its original condition, take out the rails and even recontour the land, which would be too expensive. It would also be very expensive to get this thing back in operation, so they just keep it in somewhat minimal condition. This route worked out okay for the North Coast Limited passenger train, but it would not work out well for freight trains. The curvatures are too tight, the grade's too steep, and the sidings are way too short for the length of today's freight trains. Look at this big cut coming up, all done by handwork, back-breaking labor with picks and shovels, some small wagons, undoubtedly some dynamite. The highway you see off to the left is Interstate 90, which parallels the Northern Pacific Main Line fairly closely from Billings, Montana, all the way out to the Pacific coast. And we're just about exactly over the Continental Divide here. Well, there it is. That's the spot that where I observed water flowing in both directions, east to the Gulf of Mexico through the Missouri River, and west through down to the down into Butte and the Silver Bow Creek and Columbia River and out to the Pacific Ocean at Astoria, Oregon. You can see the main line on the right. They've kept the main line up somewhat well, but the siding there, no siding is on the right in this photo. They've let trees grow up through it. These wood ties look like they're, what, about 1960 or something like that? Yeah, if they were going to run trains up here, redo this, they'd probably have to put all new ties and rail in. These signs have been here, it's Continental Divide signs. were installed for the passenger trains, which of course have not been through here since 1979. So by the time I took these photos, they were about 40 years old. And now you can see Butte, Silver Bow Valley in the distance. Here's the close-up of the Northern Pacific line as it drops down into Butte. And it was a sheer drop-off. I've ridden in the dome cars down there on the North Coast Limited, and when you look out the dome car, you can't see any slope below you. You just see down to the valley floor. Very scary. Here's the Northern Pacific Depot in Butte. Welcome to America's largest Superfund site. This is the Berkeley Pit, an open pit copper mine that they started digging in 1955 and then closed down in 1982. At the top of it, the pit is about a mile by a mile and a half. It's extremely deep. The depth of this is about the same as the height of America's tallest building, the One World Trade Center. This is about 1,800 feet in depth. That's about a third of a mile deep. And the problem is in the water, which has the acidity of lemon juice, and it also has a number of bad chemicals and elements in it. It has copper and cadmium and arsenic and sulfuric acid. Several years ago, a flock of migrating Canadian geese landed in here, and it killed 3,000 to 4,000 of the geese. Unfortunately, it's getting higher and higher, and about 2023 is expected to overflow, and they hope to treat the water at that point in time, but things are pretty unsure and very complicated with this. This flows will flow when it overflows into Silverbow Creek, which of course is one of the part of the headwaters of the Columbia River. It'll go down the Columbia River, kill the salmon, and eventually make its way out to the Pacific Ocean. These are head frames for the extensive underground mines that Butte had. It said that there were over 4,000 miles of vertical shafts on the Butte Hill, and another 5,600 miles of horizontal tunnels that were used for mining. Mining in Butte is finished. There's no more mining here. It was once known as the richest hill on earth, and there are many nice buildings here. It was a very prosperous place. But now, as you can see, the economy of Butte is somewhat flattened out. Here we see the KXLF Tower, which was formerly the depot for the Milwaukee Road. Leaving Butte, here we are coming into Garrison, Montana. This is where our two main lines converge once again from the Homestake and the Mullen Tunnel to form one main line. And this is Gold Creek, Montana. Good restaurant, by the way, up here. If you get to Gold Creek, and there's reason to get here, this restaurant that we see down here with a big parking lot, great place to eat. Gold Creek is definitely hallowed holy land for NP people, for it was here back in 1883 that the last spike of the Northern Pacific was driven, which completed the Northern Pacific main line. And it was a huge celebration. They brought in trains from the east and lots of dignitaries and big celebrations along the way. They built a special grandstand for it. They had a band. And here's a really interesting photo of the white people and the Indians. I think that's Sitting Bull on the left is my guess. And look at the looks on the white people here. They're really leery of this whole thing. Look at this little kid here with his dad or his grandpa there holding him back. But nobody's got a smile on their face. And this celebration really marked the final blow to the Indians who had already been put on reservations. But the completion of the Northern Pacific Railroad totally opened up the northwestern United States to colonization. You can see this little glass spike sign here, which you can see from the interstate. Here we're getting into Missoula. Look at this private train that pulled in the night before this shot was taken. and we'll see that in a moment. There's a complete security detail with this train, and when I asked who brought it to town, it was top secret. This steam engine is on display at the Missoula depot. Missoula had one of the 3 largest train yards along the Northern Pacific system within Montana. They were all much larger at one point. This is the Missoula yard back in the days of steam. They had a big shop as well as a roundhouse here. As we leave Missoula, we pretty much stick by the Clark Fork River all the way up to the Montana-Idaho border, which is a distance of about 170 miles. This is the little town of Paradise, Montana, less than 200 people. This is a very remote part of Montana. Very few people are here even today. You can see the two-tone green color scheme on the mountains, which is the inspiration behind the two-tone green color scheme on the North Coast Limited train. This is taken from the town of Thompson Falls, just over 1,000 people there. It's even prettier ground level. That cut up in the mountains is where we get back to some flat land, and is about where the Montana-Idaho border And this finishes our approximately 12-hour trip through the state of Montana. The next episode, episode 5, will take us from the Montana-Idaho border all the way to Seattle, and we're going to have some interesting footage there. I was up there in the winter on a snowmobile and got shots of Stampede Pass and went through the Stampede Tunnel. We'll see some of that. We'll see footage from another NP fan train. And we're going to go out on this next shot, which is probably the best shot I've ever taken. It's the BNSF freight going over Lake Pend Oreille in Idaho. So I hope I'll see you in episode 5.